let's start with the obvious big news of the day, the termination of Yahya Sinwar. Talk to me about how impactful is this? What does it mean for Israel, for Hamas going forward?
I think it comes down most likely to the timing. I think had Sinwar been killed a few weeks back, maybe a month or two back, I think it would have had more significance on Israeli politics in perhaps facilitating Netanyahu to think, okay, now I can accept a ceasefire because I can go to my country and I can say, we've gotten them all. We've gotten all the masterminds, all the leaders, mission accomplished, what have you, and we can move forward with the ceasefire. I think where we stand right now, Netanyahu has the wind at his back. I don't think he feels the need to make any sort of accommodation and seems much more inclined to pursue his military solution.
Is this a situation where you think Sinwar is taken out, and it's? I mean, because I've heard already in this short period of time since the news broke, I've heard all sorts of opinions. I've heard some people say, "Well, this is it. They took out the head of the snake. Hamas is in disarray." As far as being an efficient, effective terrorist operation or proxy for Iran, they're done. And then I've heard other people say, look, they got a bottomless well of potential, folks to take up the headroom. Where do you stand on that? I mean, really, how impactful do you think his departure is?
Like all leadership decapitation that we've seen, particularly in our own war of terror, there is always a bench. I think the results of the fighting is going to move Hamas regardless to a more asymmetrical plane as opposed to fighting like a uniformed, organized militia. That was bound to happen anyway. A lot of the senior leaders are gone, but Sinwar represented the military side. There's also still a political side. Khalid Mashal is still out there. Ali Baraka is still out there, but they're not really military types. So those who sort of studied at Sinwar's knee are still there. They're going to be younger. They're going to probably be more radical. They have less to lose. So I do not see them stopping their fight, but I see them transitioning by necessity to perhaps more of an insurgency or more of an asymmetrical approach.
Okay, no, that's actually very interesting. But do you think that there's a possibility here that as a result of this latest development, there is a ceasefire and somehow Israel agrees to allow Hamas play a continuing governing role in Gaza?
I see very little likelihood Israel would allow Hamas to play an official role, which has been one of the obstacles throughout the negotiations, where Hamas wanted to still have a role. I think Israel does have much more flexibility now to go ahead and accept a ceasefire or maybe not push for all the more, decisive conditions they wanted for an end of Hamas because they can. But I don't really see anyone within Hamas on the military side. And that's those people still in Gaza willing to make that accommodation. I think Khalid Mashal, if he takes over the political duties, or Ali Baraka might. But these are guys who are outside and they're in the Politburo on the political side. And they would have to still get the agreement of whoever is still running the show in Gaza itself.
Okay. From an operational perspective, what do you make of, if anything, what do you make of the statements that Israel came out with shortly after they confirmed his death, that this had nothing to do with an intelligence operation, that they just stumbled across these three individuals and one of them happened to be Sinwar?
Well, it might very well be true. I mean, if you want to be conspiratorial, you could suggest that Israel is trying to minimize any credit they have to give to the United States for having provided intelligence, because we've seen the president, we've seen the Secretary of State very publicly, confirm we are providing information on those who are mutually wanted. Because remember, Sinwar was also indicted by the FBI along with Marwan Issa, Mohammed Deif, all those who were involved in plotting them. So the United States were after them as well. And the United States was very openly saying, yeah, we are providing intelligence because we have the authorities to go after these people ourselves. So if you want to be conspiratorial, you can think maybe the Israelis are graying it. I think it's just as likely they did stumble upon him sort of by accident.
Okay. That's very interesting. Again, we live in a time, right, where everybody's got a theory, and because they've got a phone, everybody's got a bit of a loudspeaker. So there's been already a variety of ideas out there, and I as we always do, encourage people to just take a deep breath, and we'll get details as they play out. But I think with what's happened at this stage of the game, where do you see the Iranian regime when we're talking about what Hamas is going to do? I don't know how you disconnect that from what the Iranian regime wants Hamas to do. Or maybe I'm wrong here. I'm happy to be wrong at times. I'm not really happy about it, but how much of a role, how much leverage, how much influence, decision making do you attribute to the Iranian regime and the IRGC as opposed to Hamas and their own personnel and leadership?
Iran plays a significant facilitating role with Hamas in terms of providing materials, training, guidance, intelligence, and counterintelligence and such. But Hamas has always been a fairly bit more autonomous, more independent than, for example, Hezbollah, which is really attached at the hip to the IRGC and Iranian intelligence. I think we've seen lots of public suggestions that the Iranians had some hint that Hamas was planning something big, were reluctant to get totally involved, were sort of non-committal. And Hamas, likewise, was being a little bit, limited in terms of what they were telling the Iranians, expecting they might have to go it themselves. So I believe the Iranians exert significant influence, but I think when it comes to Hamas and the Houthis in Yemen, they don't have full control or as full control as they do over the likes of Hezbollah. And I would think they even have more influence when it comes to the Iraqi Shia paramilitary groups there that they fund, train, and guide a lot more intimately than they do with Hamas. And don't forget as well, and I know a lot of folks in your audience realize the Iranians are Shia. I mean, that's what they are. That's what the government is. And they're a Shia revolutionary regime. Hamas is Sunni. And in fact, it's an outshoot of the Muslim Brotherhood, which is a political, we could call it a radical group. We've seen it in Egypt behind a lot of those riots, behind the killing of Anwar Sadat and such like that. So they are not totally tied together, not religiously as they are, but they're good bedfellows, right? And they have mutual interests.